The group of 7 leaders is meeting again in England today. President Biden expected to push his allies on taking a tougher stance on China's human rights records. The world leaders are also expected to make inroads in conversations about climate change. Already, the G7 has pledged to donate to developing countries 1 billion doses of coronavirus vaccines, half of which will come from the U.S. President Biden sat down with French President Emmanuel Macron earlier today, and they say that they agree that the pandemic is a top priority.
The United States, I've said before, we're back. The U.S. is back. We feel very, very strongly about the cohesion of NATO, and I, for one, think that the European Union is an incredibly strong and vibrant entity.
This is President Biden's first overseas trip as commander-in-chief. The president is also set to meet with members of NATO, including Turkey's president, next week. He's also meeting with the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, at a summit in Switzerland. So let's talk more about the significance of the president's trip and the G7 summit. Joining us now, we have Dana Zartner. She is an international studies professor at the University of San Francisco. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning, Claudine. How are you?
I'm good. All right, let's talk first about the tone, and then we'll get down to the nitty-gritty. Now, we've seen a lot of pictures of the so-called family, G7 family photo, and really how people making comparisons to what it was like when our former president went to the G7 summit. You know, specifically, even, the French president, Emmanuel Macron, said Biden was, quote, part of the club. So how noticeable is this, and how significant is it?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite noticeable, as you said. I mean, you can just tell from the images that we're seeing come out from the G7 meeting so far, and the receptions and even the photo ops. There just seems to be a much more collegial and relaxed atmosphere than there's been in the past. And, it's not surprising. Biden has known many of these leaders for a long time. And so while this is his first trip as president, as commander-in-chief, he's been part of this. He's been involved in foreign policy for a long time. And so you can kind of tell just from the images that, sort of a renewal of diplomacy and camaraderie that, he's drawing on from his past experience, and then just, these new steps going forward.
And that's intentional by him. I mean, he has this idea, right, of the integration between domestic policy and foreign policy. I mean, do you think they went out there and said, we got to make this a not only, obviously there are a lot of very important things to substantively talk about, but also the aesthetics and what they put forth is intentional?
Yeah, I mean, he's really got two, main points that he has to achieve. One is, he has his agenda, and he has things he wants to talk about. He wants to talk about China. He wants to talk about Russia. He wants to talk about COVID. He wants to talk about, global infrastructure going along with, the infrastructure conversations in the United States. But he also has, this job of repairing these longstanding relationships that were fractured, with the former administration, and showing that, yes, the U.S. is willing to work with this group and be part of this group. And it's actually, it's going to be quite a tough thing. I think he's making some good first steps, but there's still a lot of uncertainty on, the Europeans' side about how long this will last and whether they can really count on the United States in the future. So, there's lots of layers going on at this one meeting.
So let's talk about some of the ways they found agreement already. If the COVID doses and the vaccine doses of this big donation, some people are saying it took too long for the U.S. to get into this because we've had, we are making such a good progress here. And then you also have this 15% tax. What is this message here in terms of solving, a pandemic? And then, when we talk about digital services and we talk about this tax, obviously that's a global issue.
Yeah, and a lot of this too has this underpinning of addressing what is one of the big underlying global issues, which is the inequality between these countries at the G7, the world's wealthiest, and then the rest of the world, and whether that's in terms of quality of access to vaccines, which these pledges are trying to address. But it's not just that, right? They're coming out with this Carbis Bay Health Declaration, which is really their declaration that we want to be better prepared for future pandemics, not just for our countries, but for the world, and finding better ways to trace the spread of viruses and strengthen the World Health Organization and make sure that vaccines can get produced faster and be available for many people, to the 15% corporate tax, which is really designed to make sure that, corporations can't do a race to the bottom to find the cheapest place to do work and avoid taxes, which of course then impacts the workers and the infrastructure in those places that they're working. And so, there are these common points, these common grounds that they're able to talk about that do have this sort of overarching kind of, look, we are all in this together. We know from the pandemic that viruses do not care about, sovereign borders and state boundaries. And so we have to work together to address these kind of crises in the future.
So there's work together, and then we have some tough conversations ahead. I mean, when we talk about going forward, it's not all about, elbow bumps and smiling and getting along. We've got climate change we're talking about. He's got meetings with Boris Johnson. He's got meetings with the Turkish and Russian president, and those may not be as easy of conversations. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's absolutely fair to say. I mean, even in this conversation with Johnson, Boris Johnson has made a big pledge about a 78% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2035. The U.S. hasn't quite reached that, and politically, domestically, right, this is a big hurdle that Biden's going to have to overcome. And so, just figuring out how they're going to work together moving forward on that. And yet everybody's eyes are on the conversations later with Erdogan and Putin and what's going to come out of those. I mean, particularly, of course, the meeting with President Putin, because the relationship between the U.S. and Russia has been so strained. But even with Turkey, which has been such a longstanding ally of the U.S. and is a member of NATO, tensions have ratcheted up, and they've had their own turn to nationalism, which is a big concern for all of these countries. Merkel is stepping down in December. Macron is facing an election that's not necessarily certain. So there are these underlying kind of political movements that they have to be very aware of as well.
We're also talking about China. So much to talk about. These G7 summits cover a lot of ground, and certainly I think a lot of people will be looking and analyzing the stance and the tone that Biden takes and continues to take. All right, Dana Zartner, we're out of time. Got to leave it there, but certainly appreciate your insight. International Studies professor at the University of San Francisco. Thanks for joining us here on Mornings on 2.
Thanks, Claudine. Take care.
You too. All right, time now is 8:47. Let's talk about this forecast.